I still remember that morning. The air was filled with a fine layer of dust, hanging there like it always did in Iraq. We'd been out on patrol for about 6 hours already. 6 hours of the same routine we'd been doing for months. 6 hours of driving through neighborhoods, scanning rooftops, watching for anything that didn't belong. And honestly, at that point, I was thinking about breakfast. It's funny the things your mind fixates on when you're trying to stay alert for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. My name is Staff Sergeant James Keller. I served with the 3rd Infantry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005. This was my second deployment to Iraq, and I thought I knew what to expect. I'd seen combat before. I'd lost friends before, but nothing, absolutely nothing could have prepared me for what happened on April 17th. I joined the Army right after high school in 1998. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. My dad had served in Vietnam, my grandfather in World War II. Military service was just something men in my family did. I didn't really think too deeply about it. I just knew I wasn't ready for college, and I wanted to do something that mattered. Basic training was exactly what you'd expect. Grueling, demoralizing at times, but ultimately transformative. I went in as a somewhat directionless kid and came out feeling like I had purpose. By the time my unit was deployed to Iraq in 2003 for the initial invasion, I was a sergeant, responsible for the lives of 3 other men. By 2005, during my second deployment, I had a team of 5 under me. My team was tight. We had Rodriguez, who we all called Rod, a skinny guy from Texas who could make anyone laugh, even after 36 hours without sleep. Thompson was our driver, steady as they come. Never seen hands so calm on a steering wheel, even when we were taking fire. Jackson was the youngest, on his first deployment. Still had that look in his eyes, half scared, half excited to prove himself. Carter was our comm specialist, always with his head in the radio, keeping us connected. And finally Martinez, who'd been with me since my first tour, my right-hand man. We were stationed at FOB Falcon, just southwest of Baghdad. Our mission that day was simple. Routine patrol through a sector we'd been monitoring for increased insurgent activity. Nothing we hadn't done 100 times before. The night before had been quiet. I remember sitting outside our barracks writing a letter to my wife, Sarah. We'd been married for 3 years at that point. She was pregnant with our first child, a girl. We were going to name her Emma. I had the ultrasound picture tucked into my helmet, a little ritual I had. Every morning before patrol, I'd take it out, look at that grainy black and white image, and promise I'd come home. Then I'd carefully place it back inside my helmet liner, right against my head, like she was there watching over me. I finished my letter, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the pocket of my uniform. I'd mail it in the morning. I remember writing about how I couldn't wait to feel her kick, how I was sorry I was missing all of that. I told her about the care package I'd received, how the cookies she'd sent were a hit with the whole team. Normal stuff, everyday stuff. The kind of things you write when you're trying to maintain a connection across thousands of miles and completely different realities. Sleep came easy that night. I'd been up for 20 hours straight the day before, so exhaustion won out over the usual anxiety. The last thing I remember thinking before drifting off was that I had about 4 months left in my deployment. 4 months and I'd be home in time for Emma's birth. 4 months seemed manageable. Morning came with the usual routine. Up at 0500. Quick shower with lukewarm water that always smelled slightly of chlorine. Breakfast in the chow hall. Powdered eggs, bacon that was either too crisp or too rubbery, never in between, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The guys were in good spirits. Rod was telling some elaborate story about his cousin's wedding back home. Something involving a mariachi band and a lost ring. "I'm telling you, Sarge," he said between bites. "My family cannot do anything simple. My sister's quinceañera? 3 fights, 2 ambulances, and 1 arrest." We all laughed. It was good to start the day with laughter. You never knew how it would end. Briefing was at 0600. Captain Reynolds went over the patrol route, highlighted a few areas of concern, places where there had been IED activities in the past week. Neighborhoods known for sniper threats. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Keep your eyes open today, gentlemen," he said at the end of the briefing. Standard closing remarks. Let's all come home. We geared up and headed to the motor pool. Thompson was already going over the Humvee, checking fluid levels, tire pressure. He was meticulous that way. Martinez and I discussed the route one more time while Jackson and Carter loaded our gear. By 0700, we were rolling out of the FOB, a convoy of 3 Humvees. We were in the middle. Standard procedure. The route took us through a mixed urban and semi-rural area on the outskirts of the city. The morning was already hot, the temperature climbing past 90 degrees with the promise of hitting triple digits by midday. Inside the Humvee, even with the AC struggling to keep up, it was stifling. The first few hours were quiet. We passed through checkpoints, nodded to Iraqi police, watched children playing in the streets. Some waved, others stared with expressions I couldn't read. After so many months, I'd stopped trying to interpret those looks. Were they grateful? Resentful? Just curious. It was impossible to know, and dwelling on it didn't help anyone. Around 1100, we stopped at a small outpost to check in, refill water, and stretch our legs. I remember standing there squinting against the sun, surveying the landscape around us. Miles of tan and brown, punctuated by the occasional green where someone had managed to irrigate. The sky was a washed-out blue, hazy with dust. In another context, it might have been beautiful. All quiet so far, Martinez said, coming to stand beside me. He was drinking water, his face gleaming with sweat beneath his helmet. Yeah, I replied. Let's hope it stays that way. We were back on the road by 11:30. The plan was to complete a wide loop through our assigned sector and return to base by 1600. Simple. Routine. The attack came about 30 minutes later. We were passing through a narrow stretch of road with high walls on either side. Not an ideal position tactically. I remember noticing a garbage pile up ahead on the right side and feeling that immediate sense of unease. Garbage piles were common IED hiding spots. Shuren? Thompson, I said, give that trash a wide berth. Roger that, Sarge, he replied, already adjusting our course to swing wider to the left side of the road. That decision, that simple, split-second decision based on countless hours of training and experience, is why I'm here to tell this story. The blast came from the left, not the right. Not from the garbage pile we were avoiding, but from what looked like an abandoned car on the opposite side. The explosion wasn't massive, not like some of the IEDs we'd encountered, but it was enough to startle Thompson and send our Humvee swerving sharply. What happened next is both crystal clear and strangely fragmented in my memory. I remember the violent jerk as Thompson overcorrected. I remember the sensation of weightlessness as the Humvee tilted, then rolled. I remember the sound of metal scraping against pavement, of glass shattering, of the guys yelling. I remember thinking with perfect clarity, Sarah's going to be pissed. The Humvee rolled twice before coming to rest on its roof. The world was suddenly upside down, disorienting. My ears were ringing from the explosion, but I could hear shouting, both from inside our vehicle and from the other Humvees in the convoy. Status. Give me status. I was yelling before I even realized it. Military training kicks in that way. Automatic responses programmed deep into your brain. I'm good, came Martinez's voice, strained but steady. Good here, from Carter. Rod groaned something unintelligible, which I took as a sign he was at least conscious. But there was no response from Thompson or Jackson. I was hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. Blood was dripping into my eyes from a cut on my forehead, and my right shoulder screamed in pain when I tried to move. But I was alive and I was conscious, which meant I had responsibilities. Thompson? Jackson? I called again, trying to orient myself enough to see them. That's when I realized something was wrong. Very wrong. There was a smell, not just the expected smells of dust and explosive residue and hot metal, but something chemical. Fuel. We need to get out, I said, my voice suddenly calm. Now, the vehicle could go up. I released my seatbelt, falling awkwardly onto the roof of the Humvee, now the floor from our perspective. Pain shot through my right shoulder and arm. Dislocated, I thought, or broken. But that was a problem for later. I could hear activity outside, the other teams securing the area, calling for support. Standard procedure. We had minutes, maybe, before the whole situation could escalate. Martinez was already helping Carter out through a shattered window. Rod was moving slowly, blood visible on his face. I turned to find Thompson, slumped against his seatbelt, unconscious but breathing. Jackson was in worse shape. He had been on the side that took the brunt of the explosion. His leg was pinned and there was a lot of blood. Martinez, get Carter and Rod clear, then come back for Thompson, I ordered. I'll work on Jackson. The next few minutes were a blur of adrenaline and focus. I remember the searing heat, the growing smell of fuel, the distant sounds of the rest of the unit securing the perimeter and calling for support. I remember the sticky feel of blood, mine, Jackson's, as I tried to free his leg from the crushed metal. Stay with me, Jackson, I kept saying, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. We're getting out of here. Think about that girlfriend of yours. Mama, what's her name? Melissa? She's waiting for you, man. Stay with me. It took both Martinez and me to finally free Jackson's leg. It was a mess. Compound fracture, arterial bleeding. I applied a tourniquet while Martinez went back for Thompson. The fuel smell was stronger now. We were running out of time. "Sarge, he's stuck," Martinez called out. The steering column collapsed. "I can't get him out." I finished securing Jackson's tourniquet and dragged him toward the broken window, where waiting hands pulled him to safety. "Get Jackson clear," I told Martinez. "I'll get Thompson." Martinez hesitated only a second before nodding and helping pass Jackson through the window. I moved back to Thompson. He was regaining consciousness, groaning in pain and confusion. Hey buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "We've got a bit of a situation here. I need you to help me if you can." His eyes focused on me, recognition dawning through the haze of what was likely a concussion. "What happened?" he mumbled. "Humvee rolled. We need to get out." I didn't mention the fuel smell, now so strong it was making my eyes water. No need to add panic to the situation. I assessed the problem. The Humvee's frame had buckled in the rollover, pinning the steering column down and onto Thompson's legs. He wasn't trapped by injury like Jackson had been. There was no visible blood, but he was definitely stuck. "I'm going to try to lift this," I told him, positioning myself to get leverage on the column. "When I do, you pull yourself out, understand?" He nodded, grimacing. I braced my good shoulder under the column and pushed with everything I had. Pain exploded through my injured arm, but I felt the column shift slightly. "Now," I grunted. Thompson pulled, dragging himself a few inches before the column settled back down. "Again," I gasped, repositioning. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. This time he managed to slide further, almost clear. That's when I heard it, a sound like a kettle beginning to boil. "Move!" I shouted, abandoning finesse for desperate strength. I heaved upward on the column one last time, ignoring the blinding pain, and Thompson pulled himself the final distance needed. I grabbed him by his body armor and dragged him toward the window. Outside, I could see Martinez reaching in to help. "Take him!" I yelled, pushing Thompson toward the window. What happened next is something I've gone over 1,000 times in my mind. Was there something else I could have done? Some precaution I could have taken? Some different decision I could have made? As Martinez pulled Thompson through the window, I turned back to make one final check of the vehicle. A habitual action drilled into us during training. Never leave a man behind. Never leave sensitive equipment if you can help it. I spotted my helmet on what was now the ceiling of the Humvee. Inside was the ultrasound picture of Emma. Without thinking, I reached for it. That's when the world erupted. Later, they told me it wasn't the fuel tank that exploded, at least not initially. It was a secondary IED, smaller than the first, likely triggered remotely once the insurgents saw we were vulnerable. The perfect 1-2 punch. First disable the vehicle, then destroy it once the occupants were trapped or exposed. I remember a flash of intense heat and pressure. I remember being thrown, a sensation of flying through molasses. I remember a moment of perfect, absolute clarity where I thought, so this is how it ends. And then nothing. Darkness. When awareness returned, it was strange, disjointed. I wasn't in pain anymore, which should have been my first clue that something was very, very wrong. I felt like I was floating, or maybe sinking. It was hard to tell which way was up or down. There were sounds, but they were muffled, distant. Shouting, the crack of rifle fire, the thump-thump of helicopter rotors approaching. I tried to open my eyes, but nothing happened. I tried to move my arms, my legs, anything, but there was no response. For a moment, panic surged through me. Was I paralyzed? Trapped in my own body? Then came a strange sense of calm, washing over me like a wave. The panic receded, replaced by curiosity, by a sense of waiting, like I was in a waiting room. But I didn't know what I was waiting for. I became aware of a presence. No, multiple presences. It wasn't that I could see them. I still couldn't seem to open my eyes, but I knew they were there. It felt like standing in a crowded room with the lights off. You can't see anyone, but you can feel them around you. "James," a voice said, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Or I would have, if I could have moved. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. "James, it's okay. You're safe now." And suddenly I could see. But what I saw wasn't the dusty road in Iraq. It wasn't my team or the burning Humvee or the medics I knew must be responding to the scene. I was standing, actually standing, in a place that defied description. It wasn't exactly light, and it wasn't exactly dark. It was everything all at once. Like looking at every color in the spectrum simultaneously, but somehow it didn't hurt my eyes. If anything, it felt natural, like this was how we were always meant to see, and I wasn't alone. Standing before me was Staff Sergeant Michael Davis. Davis, who had been killed 3 months earlier by a sniper while on patrol. Davis, whose memorial service I had attended, whose letter to his parents I had helped write. Davis, who was now looking at me with a smile that held no trace of the pain or fear that had marked his final moments in life. "Davis?" I whispered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "What ... How... Hello, Keller," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it. "Bet you didn't expect to see me again so soon?" I stared at him, trying to process what I was seeing. Davis looked whole, healthy. There was no sign of the wound that had taken his life. He was wearing his uniform, but it was pristine, lacking the dust and wear that had been a constant feature of our deployment. "Am I..." I couldn't finish the question. Davis's expression softened. "Not exactly. Not yet, anyway. You're in between." "In between what?" "In between there and here. Between then and now. Between life and what comes after." I looked around, trying to make sense of our surroundings. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor. Yet I was standing on something. There was no source of light, yet I could see perfectly. There was no wind, yet I felt a gentle movement, like being underwater but still able to breathe. What is this place?" I asked. Davis shrugged. "I don't have a name for it. It's not what they talk about in church, if that's what you're asking. It's not pearly gates or clouds or any of that. It's just the next place. The waiting room, maybe." "Waiting for what?" "For what comes next," he said simply. "For some, that's going back. For others, it's moving forward." As he spoke, I became aware of others around us. They weren't all visible at first, more like impressions or shadows at the edge of my perception. But as I focused, they came into sharper relief. There was Private Wilson, who had been in my unit during my first deployment, killed when his vehicle hit an IED. Specialist Rivera, who died of his wounds at the field hospital after a firefight in Fallujah. Lieutenant Phillips, who I'd known from training, killed on his 3rd day in country. And others, faces I recognized from memorial services, from news reports, from photographs on the wall of remembrance back at base. All of them were here, watching me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to compassion. "I don't understand," I said, feeling overwhelmed. "Why am I here? Why are you all here?" Davis glanced at the others before answering. "We're here because this is where we needed to be. You're here because you're at a crossroads, James. Your body is badly injured. The medics are working on you right now, trying to stabilize you enough for transport to the field hospital. But it could go either way." I tried to process this information. "So I'm dying." "You're between," he corrected gently, "and you have a choice to make." Before I could ask what he meant, the scene around us shifted. Suddenly I could see myself, or rather my body, lying on the ground several yards from the burning Humvee. I was a mess. My uniform was shredded and burned, soaked with blood. My face was barely recognizable through the blood and soot. A medic was performing CPR while another was setting up an IV. I watched, detached, as they worked frantically to save me. I should have been horrified, but instead I felt oddly peaceful, like I was watching a movie about someone else. "Your injuries are severe," Davis explained. "Shrapnel throughout your torso, burns over 30% of your body, significant blood loss, internal bleeding." "Am I going to die?" I asked, surprised at how calmly I could ask such a question. "That depends," Davis said. "Like I said, you're at a crossroads. You can go back or you can come with us. The choice is yours." I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean the choice is mine? I have a wife, a baby on the way. Of course I want to go back." Davis nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, but you need to understand what going back means. The road to recovery will be long and painful. There will be surgeries, months of physical therapy. Pain will be your constant companion for a long time. And even when you heal physically, there will be other scars, the kind that don't show on the outside." I glanced back at my broken body. The medics had loaded me onto a stretcher now and were carrying me toward a waiting helicopter. "And if I go with you?" I asked, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "Then the pain ends," he said simply. "You come with us to what's next." "Which is what exactly?" Davis smiled. "I can't tell you that. It's different for everyone, I think. But I can tell you it's not what most people fear. There's no fire and brimstone, no eternal torment. There's a peace, understanding, a sense of being exactly where you're supposed to be." I looked at the faces around me. All these men and women who had died in service to their country. They looked at peace just as Davis had said. But what about Sarah? What about Emma? I promised I'd come home to them. Davis's expression softened. They'll grieve, of course, but they'll survive. Humans are resilient that way. They'll build lives that honor your memory. I shook my head. That's not good enough. I want to be there. I want to hold my daughter. I want to watch her grow up. Even if it means years of pain and struggle, even if you're not the same man who left for Iraq, physical therapy can rebuild your body, James, but some changes go deeper. The man who returns won't be the same man who left. I considered his words. Would Sarah still want me if I came back broken? Would I be a burden rather than a husband, a patient rather than a father? She deserves better than that, I murmured. She deserves what she chose. Davis countered. She chose you, knowing the risks of loving a soldier. Don't make her decision for her. As we spoke, the scene around us shifted again. Now I could see the inside of the helicopter. A flight medic was bent over my body, shouting something I couldn't hear to the pilot. My vital signs were displayed on a small monitor. Heart rate dangerously low, blood pressure barely registering. They're losing you? Davis said quietly. I felt a pull then, a gentle but insistent tug drawing me toward my body. At the same time, I felt another pull in the opposite direction, toward Davis and the others, toward the peaceful unknown they represented. I need to decide now, don't I? I asked. Davis nodded. Soon. The longer you stay in between, the harder it becomes to go back. I looked at the group of fallen soldiers. Did you all have this choice? Some nodded. Others looked away. Not all injuries allow for a choice, Davis explained. Some deaths are too sudden, too complete. Others, like yours, leave a window, a moment of possibility. I thought about Sarah, about the baby we had planned and dreamed of. I thought about the pain Davis had promised would await me if I returned. I thought about the peace that seemed to radiate from him and the others. I'm afraid, I admitted. Of what? Of both options. Of the pain if I go back. Of the unknown if I don't. Davis stepped closer, putting a hand on my shoulder. Unlike the world I'd left, where such contact might have hurt my injured body, here his touch was comforting, grounding. Fear is part of being human, he said. It doesn't go away no matter which path you choose. But I can tell you this, both paths lead somewhere worth going. There are no wrong choices here, only different journeys. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself, to find clarity in this impossible situation. When I opened them again, I had a question. If I go back, will I remember any of this? Will I remember seeing you, talking to you? Davis hesitated. Most don't, not completely. You might have fragments, impressions, or you might remember it as a dream, something your mind created to cope with trauma. Or you might remember everything but find no one believes you. And if I come with you, then you'll understand everything. All the questions you've ever had about life, about why things happen the way they do, you'll know the answers. Not because someone tells you, but because you'll see how it all fits together. I felt the pull toward my body growing stronger. The monitor in the helicopter showed my heartbeat becoming more erratic. They're fighting for you, Davis said. Your team, the medics, they haven't given up. That thought settled something in me. My team hadn't given up on me. How could I give up on them? On Sarah? On Emma? I want to go back, I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind. I need to go back. Davis nodded, a small smile on his face. I thought you might say that. Will I see you again? I asked. Eventually, he replied. We all meet again, one way or another. Time works differently here. What seems like decades to you will pass like moments for us. The other soldiers were backing away now, fading into the strange, not light that surrounded us. Only Davis remained clear and present. It's going to hurt, he warned. Going back. The moment you reconnect with your body, you'll feel everything. I steeled myself. I can handle it. I have to. He nodded, respect in his eyes. Before you go, there's something you should know. Something important. I waited, sensing that whatever he was about to say was the reason I had been brought to this place. The message I was meant to hear. You're being sent back for a reason, James. Your life from this point forward has purpose. A specific purpose. You'll understand it eventually, but you need to be open to it. You need to listen. Listen to what? I asked, confused. To the silence between heartbeats. To the spaces between words. To the truth that hides in plain sight. He smiled at my bewildered expression. It won't make sense now, but it will. Just remember, you're being sent back for a reason. The pull was almost painful now. a stretching sensation as if I was being drawn in two directions at once. "It's time," Davis said, stepping back. "Remember what I told you, James. And know that we'll be watching over you." "Wait," I called, feeling myself starting to drift toward my body. "What's the message? What am I supposed to do?" But Davis was fading, his voice becoming distant. "You'll know when it's time. Just live, James. Live fully and with purpose." And then he was gone, and I was rushing back toward my body, moving faster and faster until... pain. Unimaginable, all-consuming pain. I gasped, my eyes flying open to bright lights and frantic movement. Someone was shouting. Alarms were blaring. The taste of blood filled my mouth. "He's back," someone shouted. "We've got him back." Hands were on me, voices calling out medical terminology I couldn't follow. The helicopter vibrated around me, the noise deafening after the strange quiet of... where had I been? The memory was already fading, slipping away like water through my fingers. "Staff Sergeant Keller, can you hear me?" A voice shouted over the noise. A face appeared above me, a flight medic, her features tense with concentration. "Blink if you can hear me." I managed to blink, each tiny movement sending fresh waves of agony through my body. "Good," she said. "We're 5 minutes out from the field hospital. You're going to be okay, but I need you to hang in there. Can you do that for me?" I tried to speak, but something was in my throat, a tube. I blinked again instead. "Good man," she said, adjusting something on my IV line. "The doctors are standing by. You're in good hands." As she worked, I became aware of a strange sensation beneath the pain. A certainty, a knowing that I couldn't explain. I had been somewhere. I had seen something. I had been told something important, though the details were fading with each passing second. But one thought remained clear. I had chosen to come back. I had been given a choice, and I had chosen to return to this life, to this pain, to my family. The knowledge was like an anchor, something solid to hold on to as waves of agony crashed over me. The next few hours, or perhaps days, it was hard to tell, passed in a blur of surgical lights, voices, and medication-induced unconsciousness. I would surface briefly into awareness, catch fragments of conversation, feel hands working on my broken body, then slip under again. I remember a doctor standing over me, explaining that I had made it through the first surgery, but would need several more. I remember a nurse changing my bandages, her gentle hands belying the severity of what lay beneath the gauze. I remember the metallic taste of blood in my mouth, the dryness of my throat after the breathing tube was removed, the ache that seemed to reach to my very bones. And always beneath everything, that strange certainty. I had chosen this. I had chosen to come back. It was 3 days before I was stable enough to be transported to the military hospital in Germany. By then, I had a better understanding of my injuries. Third-degree burns over much of my right side, multiple shrapnel wounds to my torso, arms and legs, a collapsed lung, internal bleeding that had nearly killed me several times on the operating table, a broken right arm and collarbone. "You're lucky to be alive, Staff Sergeant," the doctor told me during his final check before my transport. "Actually, lucky doesn't cover it. Your survival borders on miraculous." I tried to speak, my voice a raspy whisper after days with a breathing tube. "My team?" The doctor's expression softened. "They all made it. Thompson has a concussion and some broken ribs. Jackson lost his leg below the knee, but he's stable and being treated here as well. The others had minor injuries. They've already been treated and released back to duty." Relief flooded through me. They had survived. We had all survived. "And the others?" I managed to ask. "The ones who were? Who died before?" The doctor looked confused. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Davis," I whispered. "Staff Sergeant Michael Davis. And Wilson. Rivera." Phillips. A flicker of concern crossed the doctor's face. "I don't know those names, Staff Sergeant. Were they involved in the same incident?" I frowned, trying to grasp at memories that seemed just out of reach. Why had I asked about them? Where had those names come from? "Never mind," I said, exhaustion overtaking me again. Just confused." The doctor made a note on my chart. "That's normal with the medication you're on and with the trauma you've experienced. Rest now. You're going to Germany in a few hours." As he left, I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumble of images and sensations in my mind. There was something important, something I was supposed to remember, but it kept slipping away like smoke. The next thing I knew, I was being loaded onto a transport plane, my body secured to a stretcher, IV lines and monitoring equipment accompanying me. A medical team would be with me for the entire flight. One of them was adjusting something on my IV when she noticed my eyes were open. "We're on our way to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany," she explained. "The flight will take about 6 hours. Your wife has been notified and is flying over to meet you there." Sarah. The thought of her brought a rush of emotion so intense it threatened to overwhelm me. She was coming. She would be there when I arrived. "Baby?" I managed to ask. The medic smiled. "Your wife is fine, and so is the baby, from what we've been told. She's about 6 months along now, right?" I nodded slightly, relief washing through me. "Try to rest during the flight," she advised. "The more you sleep, the faster you heal." I closed my eyes, letting the medication pull me back toward unconsciousness. But just before I slipped under, a thought surfaced with startling clarity. Davis. I had spoken with Davis, who had been dead for months. Not just Davis, others too. Soldiers who had died in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had been somewhere else, somewhere between. The memory hit me with the force of revelation. I had died. I had actually died, and I had been given a choice to return or to move on. And I had chosen to return. For Sarah, for Emma, for some purpose I couldn't yet understand. Listen to the silence between heartbeats. A voice whispered in my memory. "You're being sent back for a reason." As the transport plane carried me away from Iraq, from the place where I had died and been reborn, I held on to that fragment of memory like a talisman. It would be weeks before I could piece together more of what had happened in that strange liminal space. Months before, I would understand the message I had been given. But in that moment, flying over foreign lands with my broken body and fragmented memories, one thing was certain. I had been given a second chance. And whatever pain lay ahead, whatever struggles awaited me in recovery, I would face them knowing that I had chosen this path. I had chosen to live. I just didn't yet understand why. The doctors in Germany were amazed by my condition. Not because I was doing well, I wasn't, by any normal standard, but because I was alive at all. By all medical reasoning, you shouldn't have survived the initial blast. One of the trauma specialists told me during his rounds, let alone the transport to the field hospital and the surgeries. Your heart stopped 3 times on the operating table. 3 times. I had died 3 times, yet here I was, alive against all odds. The knowledge should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like confirmation. I hadn't imagined what happened. It had been real. Sarah arrived the day after I did. I'll never forget the moment she walked into my room. I was heavily bandaged, tubes running in and out of my body, monitors beeping steadily beside me. I must have looked like a horror show. But the moment she saw me, her face lit up with such joy, such relief, that for a moment all my pain faded away. "James," she whispered, rushing to my bedside. She was careful not to touch me. The doctors had warned her about my burns and injuries, but she leaned close, her face inches from mine. "You're alive. You're really alive." I tried to smile, though I wasn't sure how successful I was. "Told you I'd come back," I managed to rasp. She laughed through her tears. "Yes, you did. But maybe next time, try to come back in one piece." Her humor, her strength in that moment, it confirmed I had made the right choice. This woman carrying our child, facing the prospect of my death with courage, and now my injuries with humor and love. She was worth any amount of pain. She placed her hand gently on the bed near mine, not touching, but close enough that I could feel her warmth. "They told me how bad it was," she said, her voice lower now. "They told me to prepare myself. That even if you survived, you might not be the same." I managed to move my left hand, the less injured one, just enough to touch her fingertips with mine. "I'm not the same," I said quietly, "but I'm still me. I'm still yours." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "That's all that matters." She stayed with me in Germany for 2 weeks while I underwent more surgeries and began the earliest stages of recovery. She was there when I took my first assisted steps, a monumental achievement that exhausted me so completely I slept for 12 hours afterward. She was there when the nightmares started. Violent, disorienting episodes where I would wake up screaming, convinced I was back in the burning Humvee. And she was there when I finally told her about what I had experienced during those moments when my heart had stopped. We were alone in my hospital room. It was late evening, the hospital relatively quiet around us. My condition had stabilized enough that I was scheduled to be transported back to the States in a few days, to Walter Reed Army Medical Center for long-term recovery and rehabilitation. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. "Something that happened when I was injured. And I need you to just listen, even if it sounds crazy." Sarah set down the book she'd been reading to me and leaned forward, giving me her full attention. I'm listening. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain it still caused in my damaged lungs. When the Humvee exploded, when I was most badly injured, I died, Sarah. Not just clinically, not just for a moment. I died. She nodded slowly. The doctors told me your heart stopped several times. This was different. I insisted. I wasn't just unconscious. I was somewhere else. I told her everything I could remember about finding myself in that strange place that wasn't quite light and wasn't quite dark, about seeing Davis and the others, about being given a choice to stay or return, about the message I had been given, though I still didn't understand what it meant. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of disbelief or concern. But Sarah just listened, her expression thoughtful, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and very gently touched my cheek, one of the few parts of me that wasn't bandaged or burned. I believe you, she said simply. I blinked in surprise. You do? Just like that? She smiled. James, I've known you for 8 years. I've never known you to lie about anything important. And this, she gestured to my broken body. This is about as important as it gets. If you say you experienced those things, then you did. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I hadn't realized how much I'd feared her disbelief, how much I'd worried she would think I was hallucinating, or, worse, losing my mind. The doctors would say it was just my brain's way of processing trauma, I said. Lack of oxygen, medication, shock. They'd have a dozen scientific explanations. Sarah shrugged. Maybe, but science doesn't know everything. There are millions of people across cultures and throughout history who have reported similar experiences. Are they all hallucinating? All making it up? Or is there something happening that we just don't fully understand yet? Her open-mindedness, her willingness to consider possibilities beyond the strictly material, it was one of the things I had always loved about her. What do you think it means? I asked. The message? Davis said I was being sent back for a reason, that I had a purpose to fulfill. She considered this. I don't know. Maybe it will become clear in time. Or maybe what? Maybe the purpose is simply to live, James. To be a husband to me, a father to Emma. To appreciate every moment because you've seen firsthand how fragile life is. I thought about this. It seemed both profound and too simple at the same time. Could my purpose really be something so basic, so universal? I feel like there's something more, I admitted. Something specific I'm supposed to do or understand. Davis said to listen to the silence between heartbeats. What does that even mean? Sarah squeezed my hand gently. I don't know, but I do know this. Whatever purpose you're meant to fulfill, you won't have to face it alone. I'm here, and soon Emma will be here too. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Her words comforted me more than she could know. Whatever lay ahead, the long recovery, the uncertainty about my future in the military, the mystery of the message I had been given, I wouldn't face it alone. 3 days later, I was transported back to the United States. Sarah flew home ahead of me to prepare our house for my eventual return, though that would be months away, given the extent of my injuries and the rehabilitation I would need. Walter Reed was both overwhelming and comforting. Overwhelming in its size, in the number of medical professionals involved in my care, in the constant routines of tests and treatments. Comforting in knowing I was receiving the best care possible, in being back on American soil, in being surrounded by other wounded warriors who understood what I was going through in a way even Sarah couldn't. The physical recovery was exactly as Davis had warned it would be. Long, difficult, and incredibly painful. There were more surgeries to remove shrapnel, to repair damaged nerves and muscles, to graft skin over the worst of the burns. There was physical therapy that pushed me to my limits and beyond. Exercises that left me drenched in sweat and sometimes tears. There were setbacks, infections that delayed healing, moments of depression so deep I questioned whether I had made the right choice in coming back. But there were victories too. The first time I stood without assistance. The first time I walked the length of the hospital corridor. The first time I managed to dress myself without help. Small triumphs that marked the slow, steady progress of healing. Through it all, Sarah was my rock. She divided her time between our home in North Carolina and Washington, D.C., spending as much time with me as her advancing pregnancy would allow. She was 7 months along now, her belly round and tight, our daughter growing stronger each day. She kicks like a mule, Sarah told me during one visit, placing my hand on her stomach so I could feel Emma's movements. The doctor says she's perfectly healthy and right on track for her due date. The sensation of my daughter moving beneath my palm was profound. A reminder of why I had chosen to return, of what I would have missed had I made a different choice in that in-between place. As my body slowly healed, the memories of my near-death experience remained vivid. Unlike many others who reported such experiences, I didn't find my memories fading or taking on a dreamlike quality. If anything, they became sharper, more detailed, as if my mind was gradually processing what had happened. I began keeping a journal, recording everything I could remember about the experience. It became a therapeutic exercise, a way to make sense of what had happened to me. I wrote about Davis and the others, about the strange quality of that in-between place, about the choice I had been given, and I wrote about the message, trying to decipher its meaning through the act of writing it down. Listen to the silence between heartbeats. Listen to the spaces between words. Listen to the truth that hides in plain sight. What truth? What was I supposed to be listening for? One night, about 6 weeks into my stay at Walter Reed, I had a dream. I was back in that in-between place, but this time I was alone. No Davis, no other soldiers, just me in that strange, dimensionless space that was neither light nor dark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming to travel forever without echo. No response. But there was something, a presence. Not a person, not a being I could see or identify, but a consciousness, vast and encompassing. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "What's the purpose you sent me back for?" Still no direct response. But suddenly I could hear heartbeats. My own, I thought at first. But then I realized it was more than just my heart. It was thousands, millions of heartbeats, all beating at different rates, a cosmic symphony of life. And between those beats, in the microseconds of silence that separated one pulse from the next, I heard nothing. But it was a different kind of nothing. Not an absence, but a presence that defied description. A silence that was alive, that contained everything. I woke with a start, my heart racing. For a moment I was disoriented, uncertain where I was. Then the familiar sounds of the hospital at night filtered through. The soft beep of monitors, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway, the distant ding of an elevator. I reached for the notebook I kept by my bed and wrote down everything I could remember about the dream while it was still fresh. As I wrote, a thought began to form. Not an answer to what my purpose was, but perhaps a step toward understanding. What if the message wasn't about literally listening to heartbeats? What if it was about paying attention to the things we usually miss? The spaces between the obvious. The next morning, during my physical therapy session, I mentioned the dream to Lieutenant Commander Patel, the Navy therapist who had been working with me since my arrival at Walter Reed. We had developed a good rapport, and unlike some of the other medical staff, she never dismissed my near-death experience as merely a hallucination. "Interesting," she said as she helped me through a series of exercises to improve my range of motion. What do you think it means?" I winced as I stretched my injured shoulder. "I'm not sure, but I keep thinking about this idea of spaces between things. The silence between heartbeats, the spaces between words." She nodded encouragingly. "Go on. Maybe it's about what we miss because we're focused on the wrong things. Like we hear the heartbeat but not the silence in between. We hear the words but not the meaning in the pauses." I grimaced as pain shot through my arm. Or maybe I'm overthinking this because I've got nothing better to do while I'm stuck in this hospital. Commander Patel smiled. "I don't think you're overthinking it. Near-death experiences often lead people to profound insights about life and consciousness. And your interpretation makes sense. We humans tend to focus on what's obvious, what's loud, what demands our attention. We miss the subtle things. But what am I supposed to do with that insight?" I asked, frustration edging into my voice. "How does that translate into a purpose?" She helped me sit up and handed me a towel to wipe the sweat from my face. Maybe the purpose reveals itself gradually. Maybe it's not about doing something specific, but about seeing things differently. About being aware of what others miss. I considered this. So I died and came back just to be... What? More observant? Her expression turned serious. "James, think about it. How many people get the chance you've been given? Not just to survive when you should have died, but to experience something beyond this life and return with the memory of it. That's incredibly rare. Maybe the purpose isn't about doing something, but about being a witness. About sharing what you've seen with others who need to hear it." Her words stayed with me for the rest of the day, through more therapy sessions, through visits from doctors, through the quiet hours of the night when pain kept me awake despite the medication. A witness. someone who had seen what lay beyond and could testify to it. It made a certain kind of sense, though it still felt incomplete, like I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The next day brought an unexpected visitor, Captain Reynolds, my commanding officer from Iraq. He had been stateside for meetings at the Pentagon and had made time to visit those from our unit who were still recovering at Walter Reed. "Keller," he said, his face breaking into a smile as he entered my room. "Good to see you upright." I started to stand, a habitual response to the presence of a superior officer, but he waved me back down. "At ease, Staff Sergeant. No need for formalities here." He pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I hadn't seen him since before the accident, and I wondered what he saw when he looked at me now. Still bandaged in places, thinner than I had been, movements careful and measured. "How are you really doing?" he asked, his voice quieter. I considered giving the standard response. "Making progress, sir. Or better every day." The kind of answers that were true but incomplete. But something about the captain's direct gaze made me opt for honesty. "It's hard," I admitted. "Harder than anything I've ever done. The pain, the setbacks, the uncertainty about the future." I paused. "But I'm alive. And every day I'm a little stronger than the day before." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your team asks about you constantly. They're all back in Iraq now, except for Jackson. He's at Brooke Army Medical Center in Texas, getting fitted for a prosthetic." "And how is he doing?" I asked, thinking of the young soldier whose leg had been pinned in the Humvee. "Remarkably well, from what I hear. He's determined to stay in the Army if he can. Says he still has work to do." I smiled at that. It sounded like Jackson, stubborn, dedicated. "What about you?" Captain Reynolds asked. "Have you thought about what's next? Will you try to stay in?" It was a question I had been avoiding. The doctors had been careful not to make any definitive statements about my future prospects in the military. But I wasn't naive. My injuries were severe. Even with the best recovery, I would likely never regain full function of my right arm. The damage to my lungs meant I would probably never pass the physical fitness tests required for active duty. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I'm focusing on getting well enough to go home, to be there when my daughter is born. After that," I shrugged, "we'll see what's possible." The captain nodded, not pushing the issue. "Whatever happens, the Army will take care of you. You've more than earned it." We talked for a while longer, about the unit, about the situation in Iraq, about mutual acquaintances. As he was preparing to leave, I found myself wanting to ask him something. "Sir, do you remember Staff Sergeant Davis?" The captain's expression sobered. "Of course. Good man. His death was a heavy loss. Did you ever think about what happens after? After we die, I mean." He looked at me curiously. "That's quite a philosophical question, Keller. Not one I expected." "I know, sir. But when I was injured, when they were working on me, something happened." I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. I had told Sarah about my experience because I knew she would listen with an open mind. Commander Patel was a medical professional trained to deal with all aspects of trauma and recovery, including the psychological and spiritual. But Captain Reynolds was a different matter. He was a career officer, a pragmatic leader who dealt in facts and concrete realities. To my surprise, he leaned forward, his expression intent. "You had an experience, didn't you?" When your heart stopped." I stared at him. "Yes, sir." How did you know?" He was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "My father was a Vietnam vet," he finally said. "He was shot down over the jungle in '68, survived the crash but was badly injured. By the time they got him out, he had been clinically dead for several minutes." I waited, sensing there was more to the story. "He never talked about it much," the captain continued. "Not until he was dying of cancer 30 years later. Then he told me about the place he had gone to during those minutes. About the light, about seeing his buddies who had died earlier in the war, about being given a choice to stay or return." My heart was pounding. That's very similar to what I experienced." Captain Reynolds nodded. "I've heard similar stories from other soldiers over the years. Never experienced it myself, but I've heard enough to believe there's something to it." The validation from this unexpected source was profound. If a man like Captain Reynolds, practical, no nonsense, could accept the reality of such experiences, perhaps I wasn't alone in trying to understand what had happened to me. "Did your father ever say why he chose to come back?" I asked. A small smile touched the captain's lips. "For my mother, they had only been married a year when he deployed. He said he couldn't bear the thought of her receiving that telegram, of her facing life alone after they'd had so little time together. That resonated deeply with my own choice. That's why I came back too. For my wife, for our daughter who isn't born yet. A worthy reason, the captain said, standing to leave. Ann Keller, sir, whatever you experienced, whatever you were told or shown, trust it. Too many men have had similar encounters for it to be dismissed as just the brain misfiring or hallucinations from medication. There's something more going on, something we don't fully understand yet. After he left, I sat for a long time, turning our conversation over in my mind. His acceptance, his revelation about his father, it felt like a confirmation, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. 2 days later, everything changed. I was in the middle of an afternoon physical therapy session when a nurse burst into the room. "Staff Sergeant Keller," she said, slightly out of breath. "Your wife has been admitted to the maternity ward. She's in labor." I stared at her in confusion. "That's not possible. She's only at 32 weeks. The nurse nodded. "It's premature labor. They're trying to stop it now, but you should get up there." Commander Patel was already helping me into the wheelchair they kept nearby for when I was too fatigued to walk back to my room. "Go," she said. "We'll continue this tomorrow." The journey to the maternity ward seemed to take forever, though in reality it was only a few floors up. My mind was racing with fears and questions. It was too soon. Emma wasn't ready to be born yet. Premature babies could face all kinds of complications. Respiratory problems, feeding difficulties, developmental delays. When I finally reached Sarah's room, I found her in bed, connected to monitors, a doctor and nurse attending to her. Her face was pale, strained with worry, but it brightened slightly when she saw me. "James," she said, reaching out her hand as I approached the bed. I took it, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "What happened?" "Contractions started this morning," she explained. "I thought they were just Braxton Hicks, but they kept getting stronger. By the time I realized what was happening, they were coming every 5 minutes." The doctor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, turned to me. "Mr. Keller, we've given your wife medication to try to stop the contractions. If we can delay delivery even a few more weeks, it would be much better for the baby." "And if you can't stop them?" I asked, the fear I'd been trying to suppress evident in my voice. "Then we're prepared to handle a premature delivery," she said confidently. "At 32 weeks, the prognosis is generally good. The baby would need time in the NICU, but most infants born at this stage go on to develop normally." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. Sarah squeezed my hand, and I looked down to see tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was being so careful." "Hey," I said gently, "this isn't your fault. These things happen." She nodded, but I could see she was unconvinced. "I've been so stressed about you, about everything. Maybe that triggered it." Before I could respond, she grimaced, her hand tightening on mine as another contraction hit. The doctor checked the monitor. "Still coming regularly," she noted. "We'll give the medication a little more time to work, but we need to prepare for the possibility that this baby is determined to arrive today." The next few hours were a blur of activity, of medical personnel coming and going, of watching Sarah struggle through contractions that were supposed to be stopping but weren't. By evening, it was clear the medication wasn't working. "Your daughter is coming today," the doctor informed us. "We're going to move to the delivery room now." What followed was simultaneously the most terrifying and most beautiful experience of my life. Despite all I had been through, combat, injury, my own brush with death, nothing prepared me for the mixture of fear and awe I felt watching Sarah bring our child into the world. Emma Catherine Keller was born at 8:47 p.m., weighing 4 pounds 3 ounces. She was tiny, so much smaller than I had imagined, with translucent skin and a dusting of dark hair. She cried immediately, a sound that filled me with profound relief. The NICU team that had been standing by moved in quickly, checking her vitals, wrapping her in a special thermal blanket, preparing to take her to the neonatal intensive care unit. "Can we see her first?" Sarah asked, exhaustion evident in her voice, but determination in her eyes. The pediatrician nodded, and a nurse brought Emma over, holding her so we could see her face. She was perfect, tiny but perfect, with Sarah's nose and what looked like my chin. "Hi, Emma," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mom, and this is your dad. We've been waiting for you." I couldn't speak. The emotion was too overwhelming. This little person, this miracle who was part Sarah and part me, who had chosen this moment to enter the world, she was real. She was here. The nurse gently pulled back. "We need to get her to the NICU now. You can come see her once you're recovered a bit," she told Sarah. As they wheeled Emma away, I felt a strange sensation. Not exactly déjà vu, but something similar. A sense of recognition, as if I had seen her before. And with it came a fragment of memory from my near-death experience. Something Davis had said that I hadn't fully recalled until now. You're being sent back for a reason, James. Your life from this point forward has purpose, a specific purpose. Looking at my newborn daughter, so fragile yet so determined to arrive early, I wondered, was she the reason? Was she the purpose? Hours later, after Sarah had been moved to a recovery room and was sleeping, I made my way to the NICU. I had to be wheeled there, hospital policy for patients from other wards. But I insisted on standing once I arrived, supporting myself on the walker I was still using for longer distances. Emma was in an incubator, connected to monitors that tracked her heart rate, oxygen levels, and other vital signs. She looked even smaller here, surrounded by medical equipment, but the nurse attending to her assured me she was doing well. "Would you like to touch her?" the nurse asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She showed me how to put my hands through the ports in the side of the incubator, how to gently place my finger against Emma's palm. To my amazement and delight, her tiny fingers curled around mine in a reflexive grasp. And in that moment, as I stood there with my daughter's hand wrapped around my finger, something shifted inside me. A clarity I hadn't expected, an understanding that had eluded me for weeks. I remembered Davis's words more fully now. Listen to the silence between heartbeats. Listen to the spaces between words. Listen to the truth that hides in plain sight. Looking at Emma, I finally understood. The message wasn't about some grand mission or purpose I needed to fulfill. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was about being present, truly present, for every moment of this new life I had been granted. It was about listening not just with my ears but with my heart, about seeing not just with my eyes but with my soul. The silence between heartbeats wasn't a literal instruction. It was a metaphor for the space where real living happens, the subtle, quiet moments that we so often miss in our rush through life. And Emma, this tiny being who had just entered the world, was the embodiment of that truth. I had been sent back to be her father, not just in name, not just as a provider or protector, but as a fully present, fully aware guide through life. Someone who could teach her to see the world not just as it appeared on the surface, but as it truly was, filled with wonder and mystery and connections that most people never noticed. As I stood there watching her tiny chest rise and fall with each breath, I made a promise to her, to myself, to whatever force or presence had sent me back from that in-between place. I would live my life awake. I would notice the spaces between. I would help Emma learn to do the same. And together we would discover the truth that hides in plain sight. What that truth was, I didn't yet know. But I was no longer afraid of the journey to find it. For the first time since returning from that other place, I felt a sense of peace, of rightness. Whatever lay ahead, the challenges of recovery, the uncertainty about my military career, the adventure of parenthood, I was ready to face it with open eyes and an open heart. Emma's grip on my finger tightened momentarily, as if confirming my thoughts. And I smiled, knowing that whatever purpose I had been sent back to fulfill, it began here, with her. Emma spent 6 weeks in the NICU. 6 weeks of watching her grow stronger day by day, of learning to feed her with bottles smaller than I thought possible, of celebrating each tiny milestone. The first time she maintained her body temperature without the incubator. The first time she took a full feeding. The first time we were allowed to hold her without all the monitoring equipment. During those 6 weeks, my own recovery continued. It was strange being both a patient and a father in the same hospital. I'd have physical therapy in the morning, then make my way to the NICU to spend time with Emma and Sarah. The doctors joked that I was their first dual service case, receiving treatment while also doing the rounds as a NICU dad. The arrangement, unusual as it was, worked well for us. Sarah stayed in a nearby Ronald McDonald house, spending most of her days at Emma's side. I remained officially admitted to Walter Reed, but was granted exceptional freedom to move between wards. And Emma, our tiny fighter, grew steadily stronger. By the time she was ready to be discharged, I had progressed to using a cane instead of a walker. My burns were healing, though the scarring would be permanent. The shrapnel wounds were closed, though some pieces remained embedded too deeply to safely remove. My right arm had limited mobility, and the doctors were honest about the likelihood that I would never regain full function. But none of that seemed to matter much anymore. Not when I could hold my daughter against my chest, feeling her heartbeat against mine, watching her eyes, now clearly blue like Sarah's, track my face with increasing focus. The day Emma was discharged from the NICU was the same day I received news that would shape our future. My medical evaluation board results had come in. As I had suspected, I was being medically retired from the Army. My injuries were deemed too extensive for a return to active duty, even in a limited capacity. The news hit me harder than I had expected. Despite knowing it was coming, despite understanding the reality of my injuries, part of me had held on to hope that I might continue my military career. The Army had been my identity for so long that I wasn't sure who I was without it. "How are you feeling about it?" Sarah asked that evening as we sat in our temporary housing on the Walter Reed campus. Emma was asleep in a bassinet beside us, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. I considered the question carefully. "Mixed," I admitted. "Relieved in some ways. I won't have to deploy again, won't have to leave you too. But also, lost. The Army has been my whole adult life. I don't know who I am if I'm not Sergeant Keller." Sarah reached over and took my hand. "You're James Keller, my husband, Emma's father, a survivor. And whatever comes next, that's who you'll continue to be." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her perspective. The transition specialist mentioned some programs for veterans going into law enforcement or government work. And the disability rating they gave me means we'll be financially stable. So practically speaking, we'll be okay. "But," Sarah prompted, knowing there was more. "But it feels like there should be something more," I said, trying to articulate the feeling that had been growing since Emma's birth. "Something specific I'm meant to do with this second chance I've been given." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to Emma. "Maybe that's something you need to figure out as you go. Maybe it's not a job or a career. Maybe it's something else entirely." Her words reminded me of what Commander Patel had suggested, that perhaps my purpose was to be a witness, to share what I had experienced. The idea had been percolating in my mind for weeks, but I hadn't been sure how to act on it. "I've been thinking about writing it all down," I said. "Not just in my journal, but as a book maybe. My experience, what I saw, what I learned from it." Sarah looked at me with interest. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Your experience could help others who have gone through something similar, or people who are grieving and wondering what happens after death." Her enthusiasm gave me confidence. I wouldn't know where to begin with publishing or anything like that, but just writing it all down, getting it out there somehow, it feels right. "Then that's what you should do," she said decisively. "And who knows where it might lead." 2 weeks later, we were heading home to North Carolina. Our little house on the outskirts of Fayetteville had been waiting for us, looked after by Sarah's parents during our extended stay in D.C. It felt strange to be returning as a family of 3, to be entering a new phase of life so different from what we had planned. The transition wasn't easy. There were practical challenges. Adapting to life with a newborn while still dealing with my own medical issues. I had ongoing appointments at the VA hospital, physical therapy sessions 3 times a week, occupational therapy to help me adapt to the limitations of my right arm. There were nights when pain kept me awake, days when depression hit so hard I could barely get out of bed. But there were beautiful moments too. Emma's first real smile at 6 weeks. The first time she slept through the night at 3 months. The simple joy of watching her discover her hands, her feet, her voice. And there were moments that reminded me of why I had been sent back. Moments of connection and awareness that felt like glimpses into something greater than myself. The first such moment came when Emma was about 4 months old. I was alone with her, Sarah having gone out for a much-needed break with friends. Emma was fussy, refusing to nap despite being clearly tired. I had tried everything, rocking, singing, walking her around the house, but nothing seemed to soothe her. Finally exhausted, I sat in the recliner with her against my chest. "Emma," I said, speaking to her as if she could understand every word. "We're both tired. You need to sleep. I need you to sleep." "What's it gonna take, kiddo?" To my surprise, she stopped crying immediately, her blue eyes fixing on my face with an intensity that seemed impossible for an infant. And in that moment of sudden silence, of unexpected connection, I felt something shift, a recognition, a knowing beyond rational explanation. I heard Davis's voice in my memory. Listen to the silence between heartbeats. Without thinking, I placed my hand gently on Emma's back, feeling the quick rhythm of her tiny heart. I closed my eyes and focused not on the beats themselves, but on the spaces between them. The momentary pauses, the silences that separated each pulse from the next. And in those silences, I felt something, a presence, a consciousness. Not Davis or the others I had seen in that in-between place, but something both more diffuse and more fundamental. a sense of being connected to everything, to all of life, through these infinitesimal moments of pause. When I opened my eyes, Emma was asleep, her expression peaceful. And I knew with a certainty that transcended logic that she had felt it too. This connection, this awareness of something beyond our material existence. That night, after Sarah had returned and Emma was settled in her crib, I started writing in earnest. Not just notes in my journal, but the beginning of what would eventually become a book. I wrote about the explosion, about my injuries, about the moment my heart stopped, and I found myself in that strange, in-between place. I wrote about Davis and the others, about the choice I had been given, about the message I had received. And I wrote about Emma, about the mysterious connection between her premature birth and my return, about the moment we had just shared, about my growing certainty that she was somehow part of the reason I had been sent back. The writing became a daily practice, a way to process my experiences and to clarify my thoughts. I didn't worry about who might read it or whether it would ever be published. I simply wrote, letting the words flow, trusting that the act of writing itself was part of my purpose. As the months passed, my physical recovery plateaued. I would always walk with a slight limp. My right arm would never regain its full range of motion. The scarring on my torso and right side would remain visible, a permanent reminder of how close I had come to death. But I was alive, I was functional, and increasingly I was at peace with the new limitations of my body. The emotional and psychological recovery was more complex. There were still nightmares, vivid dreams of the explosion, of being trapped in the burning Humvee, of failing to save Thompson or Jackson. There were triggers that could send me back to that moment in an instant. The smell of gasoline, the sound of a car backfiring, certain tones of voice that reminded me of the shouts of my team during the attack. The VA diagnosed me with PTSD, which came as no surprise. What was surprising was how different my experience of it seemed from other veterans I met in group therapy sessions. While they described feeling disconnected, numb, unable to access emotions, I felt almost the opposite. Hyper-connected, acutely aware, sometimes overwhelmed by the intensity of my emotional responses to even minor events. It's like the volume got turned up on everything. I tried to explain to Dr. Marshall, the psychologist who ran our group, not just the negative stuff, the fear, the anger, the guilt, but everything. Joy, love, wonder, it's all more intense than before. Dr. Marshall, a Vietnam veteran himself, nodded thoughtfully. That's not uncommon for people who've had near-death experiences. It's like the brush with death strips away some filter that normally dampens our perceptions and emotional responses. So it's normal? I asked, relieved to hear there might be an explanation. Normal is a setting on a washing machine, he replied with a small smile. What you're experiencing is a documented phenomenon, if that's what you're asking. The question is, how are you coping with this heightened sensitivity? It was a good question. The truth was, my coping skills varied from day to day. Sometimes the intensity was beautiful. Moments with Emma that filled me with such love, it brought tears to my eyes. Sunsets that seemed almost painfully gorgeous. Music that moved me so deeply I could barely breathe. Other times it was overwhelming. Crowded places that bombarded me with too much sensory input. Minor disagreements with Sarah that triggered disproportionate emotional responses. News stories about war or violence that left me shaking and unable to function. I'm learning, I told him. Some days are better than others. That's recovery in a nutshell. Dr. Kani Marshall said, some days are better than others. The goal isn't to eliminate the hard days, but to develop tools to navigate them. Over the next year, I focused on developing those tools. Meditation helped. Daily practice of sitting quietly, focusing on my breath, observing my thoughts and feelings without judgment. Physical activity within the limits of my injuries was essential. Walks with Emma in her stroller, swimming at the local YMCA, eventually gentle weight training to rebuild some of the strength I had lost. Writing continued to be therapeutic, evolving from private journaling to more structured work on what was becoming a memoir. And I found unexpected comfort in gardening. The simple act of coaxing life from the soil, of nurturing plants from seed to harvest, became a metaphor for my own recovery and growth. Emma thrived. Despite her premature birth, she hit all her developmental milestones right on schedule. Sitting up at 6 months, crawling at 8, speaking her first word, Dada, to my endless delight, at 10 months, walking just before her first birthday. She was a happy, curious child with Sarah's blue eyes, my dark hair, and a determination that we joked must have come from both of us. As she grew, I became increasingly aware of something unusual about her, a sensitivity, an awareness that seemed beyond her years. She noticed things other children missed, responded to emotional undercurrents that should have been imperceptible to someone so young. When she was about 18 months old, Sarah's grandmother passed away. It was a peaceful death after a long illness. And while we were sad, there was also relief that her suffering had ended. Emma had only met her great-grandmother a few times and couldn't possibly have understood the concept of death. Yet the morning after we received the news, she climbed into our bed and patted Sarah's face where tears had dried during the night. "Great-gran happy now," she said clearly. "No more hurt." Sarah and I exchanged startled glances. We hadn't discussed the death in front of Emma, had been careful to have our emotional conversations after she was asleep. There was no way she could have known about her great-grandmother's passing, let alone understood enough to try to comfort Sarah. "Emma," Sarah asked carefully, "how do you know great-gran is happy?" Emma's response was matter-of-fact, delivered with the pure conviction of a child. She told me, "In my dreams." A chill ran down my spine, not of fear but of recognition. I remembered Davis, remembered the others I had seen in that in-between place. Was it possible that Emma had some connection to that realm? Some ability to perceive what most of us could not? This was the first of many incidents that suggested Emma had an unusual sensitivity to the non-physical world. She would mention things she couldn't possibly know, sense emotions in others before they were expressed, sometimes seem to interact with presences no one else could see. "What do we do about this?" Sarah asked one night after we had put Emma to bed. She had spent the afternoon having an animated conversation with an empty corner of the living room, insisting her friend Michael was there. I thought about it carefully. I don't think we need to do anything exactly. We don't discourage her, but we don't make a big deal of it either. We treat it as natural because for her it is. Sarah looked skeptical. And when she starts school? When other kids or teachers notice she's different? It was a valid concern. The world could be unkind to children who were different, who saw or experienced things outside the norm. "We'll prepare her," I said. "Teach her discretion without shame. Help her understand that her sensitivity is a gift, but one that not everyone will understand. And most importantly, we'll make sure she always knows we believe her, that she can talk to us about anything she experiences without fear of dismissal or ridicule." Sarah nodded slowly. "I guess that's all we can do. I just want to protect her." "Me too," I agreed. "But I also think this might be part of why I was sent back. Not just to be her father, but to be a father who understands what she's experiencing, who can guide her in navigating these perceptions that others might not share." The possibility gave new meaning to my experience, a purpose that went beyond simply bearing witness or sharing my story. I had been sent back to guide this remarkable child, to help her develop her unique gifts in a world that might not readily accept them. As Emma's sensitivity became more apparent, my own experiences after the explosion gained new significance and validation. I began to see patterns and connections I had missed before, to recognize that what had happened to me was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger tapestry of meaning. I started researching other near-death experiences, reading accounts from people of various backgrounds, cultures, and belief systems. The similarities were striking. The sense of peace, the encounter with deceased loved ones or spiritual beings, the choice to return, the transformative impact on those who came back. While the details varied, the core elements were remarkably consistent. And as I read these accounts, something Davis had said during our encounter began to make more sense. Listen to the spaces between words. The spaces between words, the unspoken meanings, the subtext, the things that literal language couldn't quite capture. As I studied hundreds of NDE accounts, I realized that the variation in how people described their experiences wasn't evidence of inconsistency, but of the limitations of language itself. Everyone was trying to describe something that existed beyond the realm of ordinary perception, using words designed for material reality. The truth that hides in plain sight wasn't any single fact or revelation, but the reality that consciousness transcended physical existence, that there was more to being human than our material understanding could explain. And this truth was hiding in plain sight because evidence of it was everywhere. In the testimony of thousands who had glimpsed what lay beyond, in the intuitive knowing of children like Emma, in the moments of transcendent connection that many experienced but few could explain. When Emma was 3, I made a decision. I had been working on my memoir for nearly 2 years, revising and refining, but had been hesitant to seek publication. Now I felt ready. The story needed to be told, not just for my own healing, but for others who were searching for meaning, for confirmation that their own experiences were real. I sent the manuscript to several publishers who specialized in spiritual and metaphysical topics. To my surprise, 3 expressed interest. After careful consideration, I chose the one that seemed most committed to presenting my experience without sensationalism, to maintaining the integrity of my story while making it accessible to a wide audience. I Died in Iraq, A Soldier's Journey to the Other Side and Back, was published 6 months later. The response was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from people who had their own near-death experiences, from veterans struggling with PTSD, from grieving parents and spouses seeking reassurance about what happens after death. Most touching were the messages from military families who found comfort in knowing their loved ones might have experienced peace in their final moments, might have been met by comrades who had gone before them. One letter in particular stands out in my memory, from the mother of a Marine killed in Afghanistan. For 2 years, I've been tormented by thoughts of my son's final moments. Was he afraid? Was he in pain? Was he alone? Your book has given me the first real peace I've felt since his death. The idea that he might have been welcomed by others who understood what he had been through, that he might have felt peace rather than fear, it's changed everything for me. The book led to speaking engagements, first at small venues, local bookstores and community centers, then at larger events focused on spirituality, consciousness, and veterans issues. I was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with public speaking, unsure how my story would be received, but the need to share, to connect with others who had similar experiences or who were seeking understanding, outweighed my discomfort. I discovered I had a knack for bridging worlds, the military world with its discipline and pragmatism, the spiritual world with its openness to transcendent experiences, the medical world with its need for evidence and explanation. My background as a soldier gave me credibility with audiences who might otherwise dismiss such experiences as fantasy. My openness to spiritual interpretation resonated with those who felt conventional religion or strict materialism couldn't explain their own encounters with the inexplicable. As my public profile grew, so did the opposition. There were skeptics who dismissed near-death experiences as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation or dying brain cells. There were religious fundamentalists who viewed my account as heretical because it didn't conform to their specific doctrinal interpretations of the afterlife. There were fellow veterans who felt I was exploiting my service for attention or profit. The criticism stung at first. I had never sought controversy, had simply wanted to share what I had experienced and learned. Sarah became fiercely protective, wanting to shield me from the harsher comments and critiques. But over time, I developed a thicker skin and a clearer perspective on why my story triggered such strong reactions. People are afraid. Dr. Abdiri Imranon Marshall observed during one of our sessions, your experience challenges fundamental assumptions about reality. For some, that's threatening. For others, it's liberating. The opposition you're facing is a measure of how deeply your message is resonating. His words helped me find a balance, to remain open to constructive criticism while not allowing detractors to silence me or deter me from what increasingly felt like a mission. 4 years after my injury, 3 years after Emma's birth, our lives had found a new rhythm. Sarah had returned to teaching, now part-time at the local community college. I divided my time between writing, I had begun work on a second book, speaking engagements, volunteer work with veteran organizations, and being Emma's primary caregiver when Sarah was teaching. Physically, I had adapted to my new limitations. The limp was barely noticeable except when I was tired. The scarring had faded as much as it ever would. The pain was manageable with minimal medication and regular physical therapy. I would never run a marathon or return to active duty, but I could play with my daughter, take care of our home, live a full and active life. Emotionally and spiritually, the transformation continued. The heightened sensitivity that had been overwhelming in the early days after my return had become a gift. A capacity for deeper empathy, a more profound appreciation of beauty, a clearer perception of connections between seemingly unrelated events. One evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, Emma, now a precocious 4-year-old with a vocabulary that constantly surprised us, looked up at me with those penetrating blue eyes. "Daddy," she said, "do you remember when you were in the hospital and I was too?" I nodded, intrigued by what might prompt this memory. "I do," You were in a special part of the hospital called the NICU because you were born early. She nodded seriously. And you were hurt really bad from the explosion. That's right, I confirmed, exchanging a glance with Sarah. We had never hidden the truth of my injuries from Emma, explaining them in age-appropriate ways when she asked about my scars or why I sometimes needed to use a cane. Before I was born, when you were hurt the worst, she continued, her expression thoughtful. Did you go somewhere else? Somewhere pretty? The question took my breath away. We had never discussed my near-death experience with Emma, had decided she was too young to understand such complex concepts. Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Sarah inquired gently. Emma shrugged, the gesture endearingly adult on her small frame. Sometimes I remember a place that's all colors but no colors, and there were people waiting. They sent you back to be my daddy. Sarah and I stared at each other, momentarily speechless. How could Emma know this? How could she possibly have access to memories of a place she had never been? Events that occurred before her birth. Unless she had been there somehow. Unless some part of her consciousness, her spirit, had been present in that in-between place when I was making my choice to return. Emma, I said carefully, what do you remember about this place? She frowned in concentration. It was like being underwater, but you could breathe. And everyone was happy to see you. But you were sad because Mommy was sad and you needed to come back. She paused, then added with the simple confidence of a child stating an obvious fact. So we came back together. We? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded. Me and Daddy. I wasn't ready yet, I was too small. But when Daddy got hurt and went to the pretty place, I went too. And when he chose to come back, I came with him. The implications of what she was saying were staggering. Had Emma's soul or consciousness somehow been present during my near-death experience? Had we shared that journey between worlds? It seemed impossible, yet it would explain so much. Her premature birth coinciding with my return, her unusual sensitivity to spiritual matters, her knowledge of things she couldn't possibly know. Emma, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, do you remember anyone specific from that place? Any names? She thought for a moment, then nodded. Michael. He was your friend. He told you important things. Michael. Not Davis, Michael Davis. His first name, which I had only ever used in my own thoughts, never in conversations about him around Emma. She couldn't have known this detail from overhearing Sarah and me talk. What did Michael tell Daddy? Sarah asked, her expression a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Emma's answer was immediate and articulate. To listen to the quiet between heartbeats. To notice what's between words. To see what's hiding where everyone can see it. She recited the message almost verbatim as Davis had delivered it to me. A message I had included in my book, but had never repeated word for word in Emma's presence. The revelation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of what had happened to me, to us. It wasn't just that I had died and returned with a message. It wasn't just that I had been sent back to be Emma's father. We had been connected in that moment between worlds, had perhaps even made the journey back together, her soul joining with mine in the return to life. The possibility was both beautiful and overwhelming. It suggested a level of cosmic orchestration beyond anything I had considered, a purpose more profound than I had imagined. That night after Emma was asleep, Sarah and I talked for hours, trying to make sense of what she had revealed. Do you think it's possible, Sarah asked, that somehow Emma's soul or consciousness or whatever you want to call it was present during your experience? I thought about it carefully. A year ago, I might have said no, but after everything I've seen and learned, yes, I think it's possible. More than possible, it feels right. It explains things I've wondered about since the moment she was born. Like why she came early, Sarah said thoughtfully. Why she seemed determined to be born right when you were closest to death. I nodded. And why I felt such immediate recognition when I first saw her, even through all the medical equipment in the NICU. It wasn't just that she was my daughter. It was that I had already encountered her somehow, already connected with her in that other place. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. If this is true, if your souls met in this in-between place and returned together, then Emma isn't just a child who happens to be sensitive. She's something more. She's a bridge, I said, the words coming from someplace deeper than conscious thought. Just like I became a bridge between worlds when I shared my experience, Emma is a natural bridge, someone who can move between physical and non-physical awareness with ease. And our job as her parents, Sarah asked, to protect her while she learns to navigate these abilities, to guide her without limiting her. to help her understand that her differences are gifts, not burdens. I reached for Sarah's hand, and to learn from her, because I think she has as much to teach us as we have to teach her. In the years that followed, Emma's revelations continued, each one expanding our understanding of the connection between our world and whatever lay beyond it. She would casually mention conversations with people who aren't here anymore, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She would know things about deceased relatives she had never met, details that were confirmed by older family members. She would sometimes look at strangers and know exactly what they needed to hear, words of comfort or encouragement that seemed to come from a source of wisdom beyond her years. We did our best to provide a balanced upbringing, encouraging her unusual gifts while ensuring she developed the practical skills and social awareness needed to function in the everyday world. We enrolled her in a progressive private school where her sensitivity and intuition were viewed as assets rather than oddities. We found a child psychologist who specialized in spiritually gifted children, who helped us navigate the challenges of raising a child who straddled two worlds. And we continued to learn from her, to let her insights shape our own understanding of why I had been sent back, of what our shared purpose might be. When Emma was 7, an unexpected encounter brought everything into sharper focus. We were at a veterans event in Washington, D.C., where I had been invited to speak about my experience and my work supporting other veterans dealing with trauma and loss. After my presentation, a man approached me, tall, distinguished, in his 60s, wearing the uniform of a Marine Corps general. "Staff Sergeant Keller," he said, extending his hand. "I've been wanting to meet you for some time." I shook his hand, noting the 4 stars on his epaulets with surprise. It wasn't every day a retired staff sergeant found himself in conversation with the Commandant of the Marine Corps. "General Hudson," I acknowledged, recognizing him from news coverage. "It's an honor, sir." He smiled slightly. "The honor is mine. Your book, it touched me deeply, more than you could know." He glanced around at the crowded reception area. "Is there somewhere we might speak privately?" Intrigued, I led him to a small meeting room off the main hall that the event organizers had set aside for me in case I needed a quiet space. Sarah and Emma had gone to explore the Air and Space Museum while I finished up at the event, so we had the room to ourselves. Once the door closed behind us, General Hudson's formal demeanor softened slightly. "I'll get right to the point, Keller. I read your account of your near-death experience with particular interest because I had a similar experience in Vietnam in 1971. This caught me by surprise. The general didn't strike me as someone who would embrace mystical or spiritual interpretations of reality. I was a young lieutenant then," he continued. "My patrol was ambushed in the A Shau Valley. I took 3 rounds to the chest. Medically, I was dead for almost 4 minutes before they got me back." He paused, his gaze distant with memory. "During those 4 minutes, I experienced exactly what you described in your book. The sense of peace, the presence of fallen comrades, being given a choice to stay or return." "Did you see someone you knew?" I asked, thinking of Davis. He nodded. "My best friend from officer candidate school, who had been killed 2 months earlier. He told me it wasn't my time, that I had more to do." The general's voice remained steady, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. "For 40 years, I've told no one but my wife about that experience. Not my colleagues, not my children, not the troops under my command. I was afraid it would undermine my authority, make people question my judgment or stability." I understood his concern. The military, for all its exposure to the realities of death, wasn't always receptive to mystical interpretations of what happens afterward. "What changed?" I asked. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because your book gave me the courage to finally acknowledge publicly what happened to me," he replied. "If a decorated staff sergeant could share his experience without losing credibility, perhaps a general could too." His words touched me deeply. The idea that my story had helped someone of his stature find the courage to embrace his own experience was profoundly validating. "There's more," he continued. "After reading your book, I began quietly reaching out to other senior officers I knew well enough to trust with this subject. To my astonishment, 7 of them, 7 Keller, confided that they had experienced something similar during moments when they were critically wounded or clinically dead. All of them had kept it secret for the same reasons I had. The implications were staggering. If near-death experiences were this common among military personnel, even among the highest ranks, why weren't we talking about it more openly? How many soldiers were suffering in silence, questioning their sanity or the meaning of what they had experienced? "General," I said carefully, "why are you telling me this?" He straightened, his bearing once again that of a senior officer addressing a subordinate. Because I believe you've been called to a mission, Keller. The same way soldiers are called to serve their country, you've been called to serve a different purpose, to help those who have seen what lies beyond make sense of their experiences, to break the silence around this subject, particularly within military circles. His words resonated with everything I had come to believe about why I had been sent back. That's what I've been trying to do with my book, with my speaking engagements, I acknowledged. And you've made an excellent start, he said, but I'm in a position to help you expand that mission significantly. He reached into his uniform jacket and withdrew a business card, which he handed to me. I've established a foundation to support research into near-death experiences among military personnel. We're funding scientific studies, creating support resources, and developing training for military chaplains and mental health professionals. I'd like you to consider joining us as a program director. I stared at the card, momentarily speechless. It was an unexpected opportunity to amplify the work I had already been doing, to reach more veterans, to bring legitimacy to a subject often dismissed as fantasy or delusion. This would be a full-time position? I asked. With competitive compensation, he confirmed. Based in D.C., with travel as needed to military installations and medical facilities. Your role would be to develop and implement programs for veterans who have had these experiences, to train counselors in how to address the subject, and to serve as a public spokesperson for the foundation. It was almost too perfect, an opportunity that aligned exactly with what I had come to see as my purpose, offered by someone who understood firsthand the importance of the work. I'll need to discuss it with my wife, I said. This would mean relocating our family. Of course, the general agreed. Take whatever time you need to make your decision. The position will remain open for you. As he turned to leave, a thought occurred to me. General, may I ask one more question? He paused, nodding for me to continue. The friend you saw during your experience, did he give you a message? Something specific he wanted you to remember? A smile touched the general's lips. He did. He told me to remember what matters when the noise gets loud. For 40 years in the Marines, through combat and politics and bureaucracy, I held on to those words. They guided every major decision I made. I nodded, recognizing the similarity to my own message from Davis. Different words, but the same essential guidance to look beyond the obvious, to find meaning in what others might miss. After the general left, I sat alone in the meeting room, trying to process what had just happened. It felt like another piece of a puzzle falling into place, another confirmation that my experience and the purpose I had derived from it were real and significant. When I rejoined Sarah and Emma at our hotel that evening and told them about my conversation with General Hudson and his offer, their reactions were mixed. Sarah was cautiously optimistic. It sounds like an amazing opportunity to expand your work, to reach more people who need to hear your message. But DC is expensive and Emma is settled in her school here. Emma, however, was unequivocally enthusiastic. We should go, Daddy. It's the next part of why you came back. Her certainty gave me pause. What do you mean, sweetheart? She looked at me with that penetrating gaze that sometimes made her seem decades older than her 7 years. Remember when Michael told you that you had a purpose? This is part of it. You need to help the other soldiers who went to the in-between place. Her intuitive grasp of the situation was remarkable. Without knowing the details of my conversation with General Hudson, she had immediately understood the significance of his offer. How do you know that, Emma? Sarah asked gently. Emma shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of how she had responded to similar questions in the past. I just know, the same way I know when people are sad even when they're smiling, or when someone needs a hug even if they don't say so. Sarah and I exchanged glances, a silent communication honed by years of parenting this extraordinary child. We had learned to trust Emma's intuition, to recognize that her knowledge often came from sources beyond our understanding. We'll think about it, I promised. It's a big decision for our whole family. But in my heart, I already knew what our decision would be. The alignment was too perfect, the timing too significant to be coincidence. This was the next step on the path I had been following since that day in Iraq when my heart had stopped and I had seen what lay beyond. 3 months later, we moved to Washington, D.C. The transition was smoother than we had anticipated. The foundation provided assistance with housing, helping us find a comfortable home in a family-friendly neighborhood with good schools. Emma adapted quickly, making friends and thriving in her new environment. Sarah found a teaching position at a local college, allowing her to continue her career while maintaining flexibility for family life. and I stepped into my new role with a sense of purpose and clarity I hadn't felt since my days in the Army. The work was challenging, but deeply fulfilling. I helped develop support programs for veterans who had experienced NDEs during combat or training accidents. I created educational materials for military chaplains and mental health professionals, teaching them how to respond constructively when service members reported these experiences. I spoke at military installations across the country, breaking the silence around a subject that had been taboo for too long. The response was overwhelming. Once General Hudson publicly acknowledged his own experience, others began to come forward. Not just veterans, but active duty personnel from all branches of service. We discovered that near-death experiences were far more common in military contexts than anyone had realized, but that most service members kept them secret out of fear of ridicule or concern for their careers. Our foundation created a safe space for these individuals to share their experiences, to find validation and understanding, to integrate what they had seen and learned into their ongoing lives in service. We partnered with researchers studying the neurological and psychological aspects of NDEs, contributing to a growing body of scientific literature on the subject. We developed relationships with military leadership, advocating for greater openness and acceptance of these experiences as genuine and potentially meaningful. Through it all, Emma continued to be my guide and inspiration. Her intuitive understanding of what I was trying to accomplish, her unquestioning acceptance of the reality of non-physical experience, her ability to cut through confusion to the heart of complex spiritual matters, all these gifts helped shape my approach to the work. When she was 9, Emma asked if she could sometimes accompany me when I spoke to groups of veterans. After careful consideration, Sarah and I agreed to let her attend selected events where the content would be appropriate for her age and the audience would be respectful of her presence. The first time she joined me was for a small gathering of veterans at Walter Reed, men and women who had experienced NDEs during service in Iraq or Afghanistan. I introduced her simply as my daughter, who had asked to be present, not mentioning her unique sensitivity or knowledge. During the question and answer session that followed my presentation, a young Marine who had lost both legs in an IED explosion in Helmand Province asked a question that had clearly been troubling him deeply. "Sir," he began, addressing me with the military courtesy that never quite fades, "I saw my buddy who was killed 2 weeks before I was hit. He was there, waiting for me in that place you described. But he told me something I don't understand, and it's been bothering me ever since." What did he tell you?" I asked gently. The Marine hesitated, glancing around at the others. He said, "The box you're looking for is in the attic under the Christmas decorations." It doesn't make any sense. My parents don't have an attic. My wife and I lived in an apartment on base. There is no box, no attic, no Christmas decorations that mean anything special to me. Before I could respond, Emma spoke up from her seat beside me. "It's not for you," she said clearly. "It's for his mother." All eyes turned to her, including mine. I hadn't expected her to participate in the discussion. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked. Emma looked directly at the Marine. "Your friend's mother has been looking for something important. Letters or pictures, I think. She needs to find them to feel better. He's trying to help her through you." The Marine stared at Emma, his expression a mixture of shock and wonder. "How could you possibly know that his mom's been having a hard time?" "I never mentioned that." Emma shrugged in that characteristic way of hers. "I don't know how I know. I just do." I intervened gently. Emma has a special sensitivity to these matters. Sometimes she perceives things others don't. The Marine nodded slowly, then pulled out his phone. "Would it be okay if I called his mom right now? To ask about the box?" "Of course," I agreed. The room fell silent as he made the call, putting it on speaker so we could all hear. "Mrs. Lawson? It's Jake Mitchell." "Yes, ma'am, I'm doing okay. Listen, this might sound strange, but have you been looking for something important lately? Something you can't find?" There was a pause, then a woman's voice came through the speaker. "Actually, yes." "How did you know that?" "I've been trying to find the letters Tommy wrote to me during his deployment. I've turned the house upside down looking for them." "And do you have an attic?" Jake asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Yes, we do. Ma'am, Tommy wants you to know the letters are in a box in the attic, under the Christmas decorations." There was a long silence, then the sound of muffled crying. "Jake, how could you know that?" "I haven't even looked in the attic yet. The Christmas stuff is all packed away up there." "It's a long story, ma'am. But Tommy told me." From the other side, the conversation continued for several more minutes, the woman promising to check the attic immediately and call him back. When Jake ended the call, the room erupted in emotional responses. Tears, questions, expressions of awe and gratitude. Emma sat quietly through it all, seemingly unfazed by the impact of what she had done. When I asked her later how she had known about the box, she replied with her usual straightforward simplicity, "Tommy was there in the room with us, Daddy. He was standing behind his friend Jake. He told me about the box, and I told everyone else. That's all." That incident marked a turning point in our work. With Emma's permission, and with careful attention to protecting her privacy and well-being, we began to incorporate her insights into selected programs and events. Never as a performer or a spectacle, but as a quiet presence who occasionally offered perspective that adults had missed. Her involvement remained limited and carefully monitored. Sarah and I were adamant that she have a normal childhood, with school and friends and activities unrelated to our foundation work. But on certain occasions when it felt right to all of us, Emma would join me in meeting with veterans who had experienced the in-between place and returned with unresolved questions or missions. As word of her gifts spread within our community, she became known as the soldier's daughter, a child who could often provide clarity or comfort when conventional approaches fell short. Veterans who might have scoffed at the idea of psychic or mediumistic abilities would listen to Emma with respect and open minds, recognizing in her the same straightforward honesty they valued in their comrades. On Emma's 10th birthday, we received a call from Jake Mitchell, the Marine whose friend had left the message about the box in the attic. Jake had become a friend over the years, occasionally participating in foundation events and keeping us updated on his recovery and reintegration into civilian life. "I need to tell Emma something," he said when I answered the phone. "Is she available?" I handed the phone to Emma, who was enjoying a quiet moment after the excitement of her birthday party earlier in the day. "Hi, Jake," she said cheerfully. Then her expression changed, becoming more serious as she listened. "Yes, I remember." "Really? That's wonderful. Yes, I think that would be very good." "You're welcome. I'm glad I could help." When she handed the phone back to me, her face was glowing with happiness. "Jake just told me that Mrs. Lawson found a publisher for Tommy's letters," she explained. "They're going to be a book to help other military moms understand what their sons and daughters experienced during deployment. Isn't that wonderful, Daddy? Tommy's words will help people, just like yours do." Her joy in this outcome, her genuine delight that something good had come from her intervention, reminded me again of the purity of her gifts, uncomplicated by ego or any desire for recognition, motivated simply by the wish to help others find peace and meaning. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and I sat on our back porch, sharing a glass of wine and reflecting on the day. "Do you ever wonder where all this is leading?" Sarah asked. "Emma's abilities, your work with the foundation, all of it?" I considered the question carefully. I used to think I needed to understand the entire purpose, to see the complete picture. Now I'm more comfortable with the idea that it's unfolding as it should, that each step reveals just enough of the path for us to take the next one. Sarah nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "It's been quite a journey from that day in Iraq. If someone had told me then everything that would happen, your experience, Emma's birth and her gifts, the foundation, all of it, I wouldn't have believed it possible." "Me neither," I admitted. But looking back, there's a pattern to it, a sense of, I don't know, orchestration? Like events have been arranged to guide us in a particular direction. "By whom?" Sarah asked. "God? The universe? Some higher intelligence?" I smiled at the familiar theological question we had circled many times over the years. I still don't have a name for it, but whatever or whoever it is, I'm grateful. For the second chance, for Emma, for you, for all of it, even the hard parts. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Me too." As we sat there in comfortable silence, I thought about the message Davis had given me all those years ago in that in-between place. Listen to the silence between heartbeats. Listen to the spaces between words. Listen to the truth that hides in plain sight. I understood it more fully now than I ever had before. The silence between heartbeats, those moments of pause where life hangs suspended between one pulse and the next, that was where transformation happened. The spaces between words, the unspoken meanings, the intuitive knowing that transcended language, that was where Emma operated with such natural ease. The truth hiding in plain sight, the reality that consciousness extended beyond physical life, that connections persisted beyond death, that love transcended the boundary between worlds, that was what our work was revealing to those ready to see it. I had died in Iraq when our Humvee was attacked. I had crossed into another realm and been given a choice to return. I had come back with a message that had shaped every aspect of my life since that moment. And somehow, miraculously, my daughter had been part of that journey from the beginning. A soul who had accompanied me back from that in-between place, a bridge between worlds, a guide for the mission I had been given. The purpose Davis had spoken of wasn't just mine, it was ours. Emma's and mine together, supported by Sarah's steadfast presence and love. We were meant to help others understand what I had learned in death and what Emma seemed to know instinctively. That life continued beyond the physical, that love persisted across the boundary between worlds, that there was meaning and purpose in even our most painful experiences. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky above us, I felt a sense of peace that had become increasingly familiar over the years. The quiet certainty that all was unfolding as it should, that we were exactly where we needed to be, doing exactly what we were meant to do. I had died in Iraq when my Humvee flipped. I had witnessed things I shouldn't have seen, and I had returned with a message that had transformed not only my life, but the lives of countless others who needed to hear it. The journey wasn't over. There would be more veterans to counsel, more research to support, more understanding to cultivate. Emma's gifts would continue to develop, bringing new challenges and opportunities. The path ahead would have its difficulties and its joys, its questions and its revelations. But whatever came next, we would face it together, guided by what I had learned in that moment between life and death, and by what Emma seemed to have always known. That love was the thread that connected all things, that consciousness transcended physical existence, and that the greatest purpose any of us could fulfill was to help others find their way through the darkness to the light that waited beyond. That was the message I had been sent back to share. That was the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along.